As we step into the world of international trade, we delve into the dynamics of intra-African trade as a strategy for fostering economic empowerment. In this next enlightening panel discussion, Africa stands at a critical juncture, poised for economic growth through strategic intracontinental collaboration. Our esteemed panelists, seasoned experts in international trade, economic policy, and business, will explore the untapped potential within the African market. From dismantling barriers to fostering inclusive economic practices, we will examine how intra-African trade can become a driving force for empowerment, for job creation, and shared prosperity. Well, join us as we unravel the complexities and opportunities inherent in regional trade, charting a course toward a more economically empowered and interconnected Africa. At this point, I would like to introduce our next set of panelists. I would be starting with Lethabo Sithole. Lethabo is an international business, trade, and investment lawyer and development practitioner who identifies as a multi-potentialite, playing in many industries ranging from construction, creative and cultural economy, and trade tech. She is the managing partner at Amila Africa, a boutique advisory firm dedicated to promoting trade and investment into and within Africa. She's been an active advocate for youth engagement in the AFCFTA in her role as the chairperson of the AFCFTA, Youth Forum. Thank you so much. A round of applause to her. I was about to say as she makes her way, but she's already on stage, so please give her a round of applause for being on stage before I finish reading her bio. Thank you for being here. Now, our next panelist is Dr. Olori Boye-Ajayi. I believe she's here. Dr. Olori is a leading expert in African trade with almost 15 years of experience in trade and investment, women empowerment. Please, can you just confirm that Dr. Olori is with us? Thank you. So I'm going to pick up with almost 15 years of experience in trade and investment, women empowerment, and sustainable development. She's passionate about empowering women in business, and she founded the Borderless Trade Network Nigeria and Liberia, establishing a network of thousands of women across various industries, and has successfully secured funding and trade finance exceeding $1 million for women in the export community, and facilitated exports to Australia, the US, and the United Kingdom. In 2021, Dr. Olori was appointed by the Honorable Commissioner of Trade and Investment of Vanuatu to Nigeria and South Africa to execute the Women in Investment Win Her program, and also the first female ambassador for Afrexim Bank, Mansa Ambassador in Nigeria in 2021 as well. She was recognized as an honoree in the Excellence in Trade and Investment category at the African Achievers Award in 2023 at the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament in the UK. She was also a finalist for the 30 leading women in the African supply chain industry in 2023. Please put your hands together for Dr. Olori Boye-Ajayi, who is the MD who is an expert in African trade with almost 15 years and the president of the Borderless Trade Network. Please continue clapping as she sits down. Thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist. Now let's switch it up. We've introduced 2 women, so let's go to a male panelist this time around. I'm talking about Mr. Michael Useni. Please just confirm, ushers could just confirm he's here with us. Okay. Just need to confirm. Okay, let's go to our next panelist. Miss Sonume Inana, please, is she with us in the... Awesome. All right, then. Mrs. Inana Sonume is an experienced legal and investment professional at Africa Finance Corporation with international expertise in various legal areas, specializing in structured finance and equity transactions. She's currently overseeing a diverse range of energy assets in Africa, including renewable power generation and electricity distribution. Very important, please. We need light in this in this Nigeria. She's currently overseeing a diverse range of energy assets in Africa, including renewable power generation and electricity distribution. She's skilled at navigating global markets, driving business objectives, and managing legal and regulatory risks. If you could please put your hands together as she makes her way to the stage. Oh, I love that you're representing in Adire, local fabric, Sonume Inana, who is an investment professional at the Africa Finance Corporation. She makes her way to the stage now. Wow, I love this. I'm surrounded by women. I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. We appreciate your time. And now I'm going to call on the anchor, the moderator for this session. I can already tell she's not in the hall, but I'm sure she can hear me. Ezinne, we need you. She is the anchor for this next session. Ezinne, as I've already introduced, Ezinne Nwazulu, who is the director of Nepal Energies Limited. Please, any of the ushers, if you could please help us bring her in. She's probably out there somewhere trying to put out one fire or the other. Ushers, please help me bring Ezinne back in. Thank you. She's already been introduced, so I rest on all protocols duly observed. She's going to be moderating this panel session, which, like I said earlier, is focused on the intra-African trade as a strategy for fostering economic empowerment. So I'm going to hand over the microphone to Ezinne now, and she's going to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaitan. Well, good afternoon, ladies. It's great to see an all-female panel talking about intra-African trade. That says a lot about the role of women in, getting Africa to where it needs to be. So I'm going to start with a general question for everyone. So, what is the current state of intra-African trade, and why is it important for economic emancipation of African nations? So we can start with Sonume and just, go through to all the panelists.
It's a pleasure to be here. Historically speaking, trade in Africa has been quite low, especially when you compare African trade to other regions. You have the total share of African trade in the global markets is only about 3%. And when you look at intra-Africa trade, depending on who you're speaking to, the percentages usually range between 14 to 20%. There are a variety of reasons for this. I mean, you have external reasons, you have internal reasons that, there are probably more internal reasons that militate against intra-Africa trade. The one major one that comes to mind to me is that we don't add value to our products. You have a situation where we literally just dig out our raw materials and sell our raw materials at a pittance to countries and continents, other continents. And what ends up happening is that you have a situation where you're not able to add value, and therefore you're unable to make more money on these products. You also have challenges like infrastructure challenges that all of us are aware of, power issues, we have bureaucracies, we have other trade barriers. But I think the most important issue from my perspective is that we need to focus on value addition. If we're able to do this, we're able to create more value chains, increase our supply chains, and find ourselves in a much better situation. The good news is that there's growing recognition of the potential benefits of increase in intra-Africa trade. We have a situation now where the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement there's been a lot of work being done to try and address the barriers. And I believe that this African Continental Free Trade Agreement would be a game changer for Africa if we're really able to if we're able to ensure that it actually, the impact that we're hoping it would propel is actually fully realized. The African Continental Free Trade Act is supposed to increase intra-Africa trade from about the 14 to 20% to about 30 to 35%. It's supposed to increase our FDI investments by at least, I think they're saying 111% to 159%. If you have a situation where foreign direct investment increases, we clearly would be in a position where Africa would have a whole lot more money to establish the much needed businesses. Job creation would obviously, a lot more jobs would be created. And not only would jobs increase in number, you have a situation where higher paying jobs would be realized, better quality jobs. So people would end up, African people, our population of 1.4 billion people would be able to hopefully be lifted out of poverty. I believe that many other countries across the world have been able to use trade as a means of lifting themselves out of poverty, particularly countries in Southeast Asia. I believe that if they can do this, African countries can do the same. So we need to look at this African Continental Free Trade Act very seriously, and all hands should be put on deck to make it, realize its full potential. Thank you.
Olori.
Thank you. Got one here. Thank you. So it's quite an interesting topic when we say what is the state of intra-Africa trade, and the reason is because trade in Africa is very informal. So what you see usually captured, which is the formal sector, is the trade volume of 14 to 20%. But then there's the informal trade that's happening, which actually constitutes a lot of the trade happening. And that is as high, between neighboring countries, we're looking at about 80%. And then if you look at maybe trade between countries, maybe in different regional areas, you're looking at about 8 to 20%. So I think it's really important for us to look at why the trade is so low in the formal sector, but quite high in the informal sector, because it is still happening. So when we look at the current state, we have to say, of course, there's a lot of data that's missing in how we can capture informal trade. And this informal trade is constituted and carried out by women and youths. Now, I want to say this because I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the room may not really understand how or why we need to get the numbers up. Right now, like Sonome said, the AFCFTA, which is an agreement that most SMEs across the continent are not fully aware of the impact, I think understanding that it helps your business to look beyond your country. So the AFCFTA is, in a nutshell, is going to create a single market for Africans. And by doing that, they will, reduce barriers to trade, the tariffs, both non-tariffs as well. And what this will do is you'll be able to go to Ghana and you'll be able to trade. All custom, duties, all those things are eliminated or reduced in some cases. But a very important thing that I have been trying to advocate for is the harmonization of a lot of our regional cross-border trade policies. So you have these regional economic communities like ECOWAS. How many of you know ECOWAS? Exactly. So ECOWAS has its own trade policy. Then you have SADC, the South African, community. You have EAC. Everyone has different trade policies. So what you're seeing with intra-Africa trade is that we need to harmonize all these policies so that the trade can, not only be boosted, but we now have, because you spoke about economic emancipation, that can only come when there is harmonization within all these regional economic communities. But, just to maybe talk about this emancipation, why it's important is because we're going to have a lot more jobs created. Income growth is going to happen. Industrial development is going to happen. So the continent cannot afford not to implement, the AFCFTA as it should, because most economic blocs, and by the way, the AFCFTA is the largest in the world when you measure it by the participating countries and what it's set out to do. Yes, the journey ahead is long, but I think one of the things I'm really hopeful about is what this would do for the future of the Africa we want, because there's an Africa we all want, right? And we want it to work for us as SMEs, as, corporates, financial institutions, and the rest. So right now, the state of intra-Africa trade, to me, needs to capture informal trade and formal trade so that maybe we might see that there's a lot of trade happening on the continent. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ezinne. I think it's going to be very hard for me to follow these two ladies because they've covered everything from tariff to non-tariff barriers and the lack of infrastructure, the need for investment, and also how we define what formal and informality means for the continent. But I think what I can add that is borrowing from what they've said, and also an observation in the developments in the regulations and the policies, is a call for the Africanization of international economic, international trade, and international development practices, which I think has been where Africa has lost it. We've always followed what the world has done, WTO rules, international trade rules, but they haven't really, even with the most amazing trade and investment policies in the world and regional economic groups, we still struggle to implement because the papers, and as amazing as they are, they really don't match and they don't fit the reality, so we can't implement them. So I think there is a positive development in academia, in the call or the realization that we need to look at the AFCFTA not as a magic wand, but as just one step in the direction of realizing, as you say, the Africa we want. The AFCFTA is just one of the Agenda 2063 goals. At some point, we want to become a customs union, not just a free trade agreement where Africa as a whole can have a single set of rules that the whole world trades with in any one of the countries. But I think that there is a great and positive development in the Africanization of intra-African trade, of international economic laws, and you can also see that in the AFCFTA's protocol on investment. And dispute resolution is no longer set to favor investors. Investors have been coming onto the continent, feeding their pockets fat and leaving us with nothing. But I think there's a realization that, yes, we can follow the West and we can follow the global norms, but we need to be a little bit more radical if we want real change. We have to go deeper. Yeah.
Michelle, are you still on?
Hi, hello. Such an incredible panel with a lot of knowledge. For sure, the possibility of integrating our people into a free trade zone will allow us to generate higher economic results, because there is so much possibilities among cross-border between our plus than 50 countries in the continent, that today majority of our countries are trading mostly with Asia or with Europe, sending raw materials and getting final products with the higher price tag on them. And we have been doing this since colonial times. Basically, Africa has always been a raw material continent. And our narrative today, being young entrepreneurs, needs to be a target on the regulation side, but mostly it's to executing what these new regulations are putting on the table. We see, for example, I'm talking now from Maputo, from Mozambique. We see the movement of goods that are passing from the Mozambican ports into Zimbabwe, DRC, Zambia, Malawi, into South Africa. And we need to break all these barriers, not only for the goods, but also for capital to be transferred between one countries and the others. So for sure, the next 10 and 20 years are very interesting in the whole continent, because internet is bringing us much closer. We have seen now some countries in the continent are moving the visa barrier for us to travel. Imagine me holding a Mozambican passport to enter DRC Congo. I need to make a visa, and this visa can take between 7 to 15 days. So we need to start breaking down all these barriers that makes even more difficult for us to invest in our own land. And this is where these new agreements are bringing us together. And we are seeing also some of the African leaderships that understanding that these barriers that we put to ourselves should be removed, and will allow to better access of goods, services and capital between one countries and the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I have a question for Sunume. From the perspective of a financial institution, what key performance indicators can be used to assess the progress of intra-African trade?
From the perspective of the vantage point of a financial institution, there are many different ways to look at, to assess the progress of intra-Africa trade. There are many key performance indicators. You want to focus on factors that speak to the economic, financial, and trade dynamic on the continent. You could do this by perhaps monitoring the value and volume of trade within Africa. You could do this by tracking the amount of the inflow of foreign direct investment in specific industries and specific sectors. You could look at policy alignments across the continent. There are many different ways to skin a cat. But from the perspective of my company, I work for Africa Finance Corporation, and we are a Pan-African multilateral development finance institution. And we've decided to look at this problem very strategically. We recognize that infrastructure challenges are a key barrier to trade in Africa. So our mandate is simple. Our mandate is to close the infrastructure deficit in Africa. And we do this by, first of all, recognizing that Africans must take ownership of our development. We must take ownership of the challenges that overwhelm us. There are so many different problems. We've decided to focus on 4 key areas: power, natural resources, transport and communication and logistics, I think I'm forgetting one right now. Yeah, telecommunications. And then what we've also done is we've made sure that we've recognized that it's very important to build local industries. You have a situation where it's very vital and very strategic to make sure that processing and manufacturing is at the center of sustainable circular economies. We invest in singular assets, but we recognize that it's a lot more effective when you promote integrated supply chains. When you have a situation where instead of just putting a random power plant in the middle of nowhere, you put a power plant, you put other industries, other projects that can sort of benefit from synergies, that can benefit from sharing infrastructure frameworks, which ends up reducing the cost overall and reduces the risks, the overall project risk for all these different projects. And we've done this in a variety of ways. We have a balance sheet of about $11 billion right now. The amount is increasing every day. And we focus on deploying instrumental capital, providing instrumental solutions to a lot of our challenges within this space. We also look at providing high-value commodities and services, products that put products for which we have a competitive advantage. And we've done this quite well. We have a project called the Arise IPP that is in Gabon. We've invested money alongside some other, about $140 million, alongside Olam International, as well as the Republic of Gabon. And it's amazing what we've been able to accomplish. You have a situation where we have a special economic zone that has been set apart to spur economic development. We're able to produce the value of about $1 billion of wood, exporting wood outside of the continent and even within Africa. This it spurred about 30,000 jobs. It's a game changer. It's attracted FDI of about $2 billion from over 100 industrial, residential investors. And it's made a big difference. It's contributed about $842 million to the GDP of Gabon. And we're looking to replicate this in many other countries. We've already started doing that. We also have a lot of projects. I'm in the power sector, so we have all kinds of power generation assets and distribution assets throughout Africa. But I think what is key, when you talk about key performance indicators, I think strategy is important. Job creation is key, but you're able to create the best jobs when you sit down and think about what do we actually need. During COVID, we all of a sudden realized that, wow, there's a pandemic, and Africa is only producing we're not producing our vaccines. We're importing 99% of our vaccines. We're importing 90% of our pharmaceuticals. So from my perspective, I just believe that strategy is important. When you talk about KPIs, our main focus is to try and execute, and we track and monitor the performance and quality of our investments. We do this by conducting valuations when necessary for our equity transactions. We do this by making sure that we are solving all kinds of problems as they happen, because there are problems almost every day on every single project in Africa, since you're almost building the entire value chain. And we do this we also make sure that a lot of the investments actually meet contractual, all the contractual obligations, contractual guidelines. They meet our impact roadmap. We usually have an impact strategy, and we try to assess. We have a very robust impact strategy metric and framework to just make sure that we're moving the needle in the right direction towards our mandate, which is really to close the infrastructure deficit in Africa. Thank you.
Great. For Dr. Olori, For Dr. Olori, what are the main barriers hindering intra-African trade, and how can these challenges be overcome?
Thank you, Ezinne. So, when we talk about barriers to trade, they are general ones, but some are specific to specific people like women and youth. And so we can't generalize these barriers. I think it would be very wrong of us to do that in our discussion. So the general barriers to trade, I mean, Sonome has done a fantastic job of just, highlighting the mainstream ones. And I think, honestly, if we can just focus on the priority areas where these deficits are causing a whole lot of losses in trade volumes and even, employment areas and all those other things, we would have an overall global trade percentage that will be higher in like 10 years. So from 3%, if we even say to double it to 6%, that this infrastructural challenges would actually help us move that along very quickly. But I'll highlight maybe 3 or so barriers, that I know I have faced. And this is a funny story, which is around logistics. Now, logistics actually affects the profitability of any business, right? Your ease of doing business, logistics has a huge impact on how you're able to move your product to the market for them to access your services or your product. And one instance that I remember, this was back when I was still in manufacturing. I saw that I had to go and source for my goods myself because we couldn't get the raw materials in Nigeria. So I had to go to, I think it was Togo at the time. So I make inquiries and I'm like, okay, let me go to Togo and get these raw materials. I took a car that I didn't mind, driving and all of that, got in the car, 5 a.m. I think it was, and like 2 people that work with me, and we drove to Togo, and we were coming back. Finding the product in itself was hassle. So trade intelligence, information was lacking already, because if I had the information, I wouldn't have even gone to Togo. I would have gone somewhere else because I didn't even find what I needed. So, we'll just hold that one to one side. So I'm coming back. Nobody warned me about the amount of custom, issues, the police, all the checks along the way. I'm not joking. There were roughly around 14 to 15 between Togo and Nigeria. I couldn't believe it. And guess what happened at the end? They confiscated my car. Wow. So we took public transport. What I'm talking about is like 6 years ago. So we had to take public transport. I mean, it's horrible what a lot of women face. Now, can I just say that the men who were there, they didn't get checked as much as I did. My accent didn't even help me, so that one was not good. It wasn't working for me. They double taxed me once I said, "Good afternoon, sir." That was the end of discussion. So you find out that logistics, my ability to move my products within cross-border is super key for a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's a hassle. You see double taxation, you're paying for something in Ghana, you're paying for it again in Nigeria. I mean, it's a whole mess for those who are trying to scale their businesses and they're in export. That's on one hand. Then you also see access to, and I know people hear this a lot, but I just want to, break the table on this. Access to affordable finance and credit facilities. So I am a consultant for Afro-Exim Bank, which is the leading trade finance institution on the continent. And I say to them that anytime you call something a fund, and that fund is supposed to provide a certain level of development or empowerment, and the people you have created it for cannot access it, then don't say you are providing access. And that is a big issue. Being able to access something that is, and you know this because I'm not going to mention names, but a lot of multilateral institutions tend to put the women thing there to sensitize the women, but you now ask the women at the grassroots, did you get the We5 fund? The We5 fund is run by the World Bank. And World Bank, for example, says, oh, we have over $350 million that we've allocated to 67 countries. Question, if I go to, okay, just across the room, anybody on the, do you even know what Wi-Fi is? Exactly. So you see that barriers to trade are not just even in the access to finance, it's even knowing the availability of the finances there. So we have very serious issues on how we disseminate the funding opportunities, loans, whatever kind of finance that DFIs want to make available for entrepreneurs. So I never like to sit on the table with the big guys and say, oh, we have a fund available. I'm like, let's make it really available. That's on the other hand. Then the one that recently has become a very serious issue is security. And security is, I mean, because we are in a very cozy place right now, we may not understand what those crossing the borders are facing. I know of many women, because I run a network, I get messages on my WhatsApp from women telling me about the brutality that they go through just to move their goods to one place. But you would think that that would be the only thing. Even those in services, there's a discrimination on pricing. I mean, it's, where do you want to take it from, right? It's whether you're in products or whether you're in services or whatever the case is. There's just a very interesting scenario playing out at the front line compared to us who are in policy and us who are in maybe solving the problem. To the issue of logistics, when we talk about, customs, tariffs, all those things that most entrepreneurs have to go through at the borders and doing business generally, in 2009, I believe African countries came together to form the one-stop border post. And the idea was, let's create a single facility where people don't have to go to multiple agencies to get their products checked at the border. And I believe it was launched, or maybe, let me say, the first one was between Zambia and Zimbabwe. But guess what? Just the one here in Nigeria with our neighboring countries is not existent. So there's no enforcement. Enforcement is one of our major issues. ECOWAS, all these beautiful things that they've drawn up in the protocols are good. But in reality, is it working for the entrepreneurs? I have people in the audience doing like this. And that's what you see. So for me, the access to finance, I think, I've mentioned this in many other platforms that I've spoken on, that if you're going to call it a fund, then understand that, like what Sonome just said about strategy, include how they will access that fund in the strategy. And it cannot be traditional banks. I'll tell you why. Women in here, when last did you go to your account officer to go and tell him you need a loan? It's very less likely. You know why? Because when we were growing up, we didn't see our mothers go to the bank. We saw maybe, let me put it this way, women like community, which is why Ashwebi, Parakbo, we like those kind of things. So I say, why not disseminate through those sort of communities? Why must they go to the bank that they've never seen anybody go to go and access finance? It's not access to finance. It's actually blocking the finance. So remove those barriers so they can trade. And I tell you this, women trade heavily informally. Yes. It's just that we need to structure it for them. And finance is one of the ways we can do that. So, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but my own is, let's make whatever solutions we bring to the trade space equal, accessible in the true sense, but also let's start to look at how we can, I love that word you used, emancipate, but it's almost like bring freedom to people. All these things that you're saying, you bring one policy today, it will counter the one that you did 5 years ago. I don't understand. So we need harmonization. Thank you.
That was really, really good. So I have a question for Lithabo. As the chairperson of the advisory board for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Youth Forum, what type of policies are you pushing for and what impact?
I think it's exactly what she was speaking about. So around 2017-18, a lot of young people were hearing about the tripartite trade agreements before it became what we know that now as the AFCFTA, and it was between 3 regional economic communities. The youth bodies in those communities then started mobilizing youth to understand what does this mean, because how trade agreements are negotiated is not with traders. It's not with the people who are actually going to use them. It's with ministry, trade ministry, which I'll speak for South Africa, is mostly a political post. So you have politicians sitting in a room deciding the future of trade in Africa for everyone, and not to offend anyone, it's an all boys club. And so we started to speak about the inclusion of youth and women in the AFCFTA early days. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, before he was sworn into office, sat with us and met with us and spoke with us about a lot of different things. And it was a group of young people who were doing incredible things in different fields. Not all of them were involved in trade, but very quickly realized that trade policy influenced how their businesses and their industries operate. So whether you're in agriculture, construction, energy, the creative and the culture economy, there's something for you in a free trade agreement and the benefits that it gives to you. And there's also, there's a seat at a table for you to speak about the barriers that exist in your industries that are very much trade barriers. We don't think about it, but in the creative and the culture economy, when the Basketball Africa League moves across and does their different conferences, they have to recreate their conference according to the rules of that region and that country, and that is costly. But that is trade, and we don't think about it. And so what we have been advocating for is the inclusion of women and youth in the AFCFTA, and I will tell you that has resulted in a monumental, first of its kind, protocol on youth and women in trade. There's not a single free trade agreement since the establishment of the WTO and whatever came before that has a protocol that specifically focuses on giving youth and women preferential trade rules, which is an incredible, incredible thing that African leaders have done to date. So the protocol is there. It is still being negotiated. The AFCFTA Secretariat I don't work for them in any capacity, but they're open to speaking to women who trade, youth who trade, women and young people who are doing research in the spaces who want to be heard. Right now, as we speak, is day 1 of the Women in Trade Conference in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. They do it every year, and if you can go, it's literally a forum of women from across the continent who trade, who go and speak about what their problems are. And they range from things that we don't think about, and she mentioned is harassment at the borders. Women trade more than anyone else on the continent, and they're subjected to a lot of very, very scary stuff, from gender-based violence to coercion. Women are coerced into doing stuff for their goods to move across. It's more than what we can think of, and I think so it's important that women come and they speak about a lot of their barriers. Yes, we speak about access to finance and infrastructure, but there are, like you said, other very specific trade barriers for women and youth. And yeah, that is what we're advocating for. And it's alive, it's happening. Reach out to the Secretariat. They're a body. They work for every single one of 1.3 billion Africans. They are open to suggestions. They listen to people. That is their job. That is the role of a secretariat, to ensure that the AFCFTA is implemented in a way that makes sense for all of us and that is equitable to all of us. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lethabo. Michelle, are you there? Great man amongst women.
And very smart and intelligent women.
Okay, I have one question for you, Michelle. And I think this is something that resonates with you. So, to what extent does inadequate infrastructure impact intra-African trade, and what steps can be taken to address these issues?
So I recently, last week was the re-inauguration of a railway that connects the port of Beira in Mozambique into the border with Zimbabwe in Mutare. And from there, this railway will connect into Harare. So if you look at the development of all the continents in the world, some of them are much further ahead of us. The role of infrastructure is basic to give conditions to people to do what they want to do. As my colleagues on the panel said, women are the driving force of the continent. You see in all the borders that you cross all over Africa, that women are trading from tomatoes, potatoes, from clothes, from any type of goods between one country and the others. But the most important factor is that there is no appropriate infrastructure. And this infrastructure is the one that blocks development. We cannot develop 1.4 billion people with roads and trucks and buses. We need railway. We need better ports. We need good power transmission lines. We need power production sites. We need better irrigations. So the role of infrastructure is primary for us to think about development. And if we think about regional integration and continental integration, we cannot think without proper infrastructure in terms of rail and also a road network. Ourselves, we trade fuel into several African countries in our region, in the SADC region, in the Southern Africa. And some of our goods can take between 10 to 15 days crossing between 4 or 5 countries to reach another countries. And mostly these long periods of times with losses and high costs to the end deliver site happens because of lack of infrastructure, happens because there is a lot of barriers between one country and the other. And a lot of these barriers that are generated and this lack of infrastructure is because there are a lot of middle people in these borders, in these roads that want to get some additional fees. And all of these fees that exist, they are not in our business plans. Because when you develop a business plan, then to present to a large bank, there is some fees that you cannot describe, but they are involved in all of the intertrade in Africa. So the banks like IFC, as the colleague is saying, they have a balance sheet now of $11 billion and growing every day, is the type of institutions that we need to target these infrastructure deficits. That we definitely need to accommodate all of these people that exist today in the continent, and not only the ones that are today. If we see, Africa is the fastest development growth in terms of demographics. We are going to double the number of our population, and all of this population that are coming in will need better roads, better electricity, better medicines, will need basically is infrastructure. Because when infrastructure is there, the people in Africa have a very strong spirit of being entrepreneurs. You know, you don't need to give a lot of things for Africans to trade and to do business, because this is in the blood of the African people. But the people need infrastructure. If our leadership, if our governments, if our finance institutions really focus in giving infrastructure, the rest will happen as automatic, because people have what they need inside themselves to do business. But the lack of infrastructure blocks a lot of our intercontinental development.
Thank you, Michelle. So we're way past the time, but I'll just want one final word from each panelist on your thoughts going forward on how we can foster economic empowerment through intra-African trade. Just, final thoughts.
Well, from my perspective, if we're able to increase intra-Africa, if we're able to increase intra-Africa trade, this would automatically result in higher added value across the continent. This would result in an increase in foreign direct investments, which has the effect of spurring the much needed economic growth across the continent. This sounds fantastic, but theoretically speaking, I believe it begs the question, as we're trying to promote more trade amongst ourselves, what are we actually trying to trade amongst ourselves if we recognize the fact that most countries, most African countries, produce relatively the same products? So if we're hoping the African Continental Free Trade Agreement would do what we're hoping it would do, I believe the status quo cannot remain. So African nations need to ask themselves, how do we add more value to the products that we're producing? How do we specialize in specific industries and specific areas to maximize potential gains on the continent? And I think it's important to really diagnose the problem properly. The problem isn't trade. The problem is overdependence. We don't want overdependence. We want interdependence. And earlier I was talking about the situation we found ourselves in during COVID, when we were unable to get access to vaccines, considering the fact that we import 99% of vaccines. From my perspective, a huge opportunity exists to develop something as simple as a pharmaceutical industry. So African countries should ask themselves, what products, what inputs can we produce to establish this much needed pharmaceutical industry? The world, everyone is talking about the just energy transition. COP28 is ongoing in Dubai. I believe it finishes this week. Everyone is talking about this energy transition. We're hearing Tesla is producing electric vehicles. The entire world is probably going to have electric vehicles everywhere, all over the continent. This means that EV batteries, electric vehicle batteries, will be required. Right now, Africa produces about 70%, I believe, most of the minerals that are required to establish these electric vehicles are sourced from Africa. So we cannot repeat the same mistakes that we made in the past. It's important for us to not just dig out the raw materials and the minerals that are required and ship them out, for the production of EVs, for instance, EV batteries, for instance. Instead, we should make sure that we are processing, we are transforming, we are, these are raw materials that must be transformed to finished goods that add a lot of value so we can earn more. I believe that if we're able to really do this, then the much needed growth, economic growth, would be realized. Thank you.
So I guess for me, it's to the entrepreneurs and business owners in the house. One of the things I have found is waiting for something to happen is just as bad as the person who is not doing it. That's what I think. And I believe so strongly that if we can take ourselves serious from the position of, okay, what do you have in Madagascar, for example? Your comparative advantage that I don't have here in Nigeria. And I say to people that the job of any institution is to facilitate. They cannot do it for you. I have seen over and over again where a country maybe in the Middle East says to me, oh, we're trying to get into, let's say, for example, they want to come into our agro space. But you find out that the entrepreneurs they are looking for are nowhere to be found. Why? They are in survival mode. The first thing they want to do is survive. And I'm coming from this angle because, like I said, entrepreneurs are the backbone of this transformation, this development we're talking about. So my question to all the entrepreneurs in the house, how are you positioning your business for AFCFTA? It's not going away. In 10 years, your business will either be a part of it or irrelevant or literally obliterate. Like, we won't even remember you. I say to people, you have to, as an entrepreneur, ensure that, like what Sonome was saying, value addition. Your production levels right now cannot be what you will use in the next 2 years. You have to find a way to get your business very much closer to the development finance institutions. Someone said to me, Olori, I'm just trying to build a studio. The person is in the creative space, and they're looking for $55 million. And I said to them, I said, what have you positioned your company as in that deficit we keep talking about for infrastructure? Or are you going telling them you need money? Be aggressive about how you are pursuing for the funding you are looking for. No one is going to dish it out to you until you show them the value. And I think for me, I mean, I'm no longer in like 9 to 5, but I realized that money is everywhere. Everywhere. The question is, how is your business positioned to be a pipeline for that money? I'll tell you, if you ask Sonome now, and I know a lot of people rush to, you know, aspire, you people are our saving grace, AFC and AFDB, all these other guys. My thing is, how can a small business owner, even if AFC can't solve the problem, how else can you partner with other small lenders, microfinance institutions that can give those small people, small business owners, finance of any kind? So I'm also challenging the big guys to say, yes, you don't come with you don't do small problem, but there are many small problems, you know.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
So is there something like finance for aggregators? Do you guys do things like that? Because it's such a wide gap between the big guys and the SMEs. So would there be a structure where there are like aggregators in the middle aggregating these small businesses to access finance?
I think when we got the different pipelines that we did, whether with private sector or with DFIs for the funding we got for some women, really what they were trying to bridge were other gaps aside the access to finance issues. So let me give you an example. They want to fund your logistics problems, not fund your business. Does that make sense? But the problem is these small businesses didn't know what their problems were. All they knew was, I don't have money. But that's not the problem. You can't transport your goods. That is one problem, you know. So I think there are funding solutions, but you won't just get free money that will just say, oh, take it to develop your business. No one's going to give you that. They want return on their investment or finance or whatever it is you're getting. So I think when the aggregators come together, the first thing we're going to any DFI for, any donor funding, is to say, we're solving this infrastructural problem. Not we're trying to aggregate funding to solve SMEs' lack of finance. So that has worked, but I'm also saying that the SMEs need to also, you know, add a bit more oomph to their business operations and plan for the future. I think that's really what I want to end with. Just plan for the future, otherwise your business will be no longer in existence in a few years.
Thank you. I wanted to speak about the free movements of persons, but I'm actually just going to echo the infrastructure conversation. An enabling environment for trade is not the AFCFTA, it's infrastructure. The AFCFTA is nothing without trade facilitating infrastructure. And on this point, I really want to commend the AFC. They're one of my favorite DFIs, and not because one of our panelists is from there, but what they've done with Arise has been like the developers and operators of special economic zones have been knocking on doors for years. And what they hear and what you hear, the data is special economic zones and industrial parks do not work in Africa, they have failed. they haven't failed. They were just not structured properly. And the AFC has come with Arise to show what happens when policy and investment and strategy align. What they've done in Gabon is incredible. What they're about to do in the DRC with the battery SEZs is incredible. Special economic zones, I am a big advocate for them. A lot of my work is centered around it. And I've spoken to a lot of people from the AFC. Arise is not the only one. They want to go beyond to close that gap. And it's not just a trade facilitating infrastructure, it's not just roads and the trains, but it's the spaces where the goods that are going to be moved on those roads and on those trains will be produced. And I think that's it. The call for infrastructure and the financing of infrastructure. But one last thing that speaks to the entrepreneurs readying themselves that the AFC also does, which I appreciate, is invest in project development. I think the gap in African projects, you can't find good projects or good businesses in Africa. There's a huge finance gap in project development in Africa, and that needs to come from the DFIs. That is development finance, and the AFC does that. They have a whole department for project development, and they develop your projects with you. So if you position yourself well, there is still support to get your project to where it needs to be to raise capital, and I appreciate that a lot. I think it's a positive development.
Michelle, are you still there? Do you
Yes,
have any
I am.
final words? Because we're way behind time.
I'll be very short. I think, as one of the colleagues said, there is abundance of financial resources around the world. And a lot of these resources are waiting for African success cases to come up. And I believe from my experience trading in so many African countries, there is resources, but we need to get better structuralization, African entrepreneurs and African companies. We need to get aligned with what is required to get these funds. We need to have proper company structure. We need to have our audited accounts. We need to have a very good corporate governance. And we need to have a strong business case. Once these are there, funds are available because all of these funds are looking for higher yields. And what we can see is that in Africa, there is, because of this lack of infrastructure, lack of, let's say, proper entrepreneurs and proper companies, and all of these difficulties make that the yields are much higher than in some other regions in the world. So a lot of these finance resources are looking into coming to Africa, but they need that we get aligned to what is required to finance us. So that will be my final remarks.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezinne. Please, media, we need you in front for the photo session, 30 seconds. But a round of applause. That was such an interesting panel, wasn't it? I can't hear you, wasn't it? Yes.